Hey, Michael, thank you for joining us in a conversation with Safe Security, talking about cyber risk management. You have been one of the pioneers in this field. Just help the audience understand what are your areas of interest, what is the topic on your mind most recently.
So first, just to give an idea, I've been at MIT at the Sloan School of Management for 33 years, and I'm the director of the cybersecurity at MIT Sloan Research Center on cybersecurity. And as that, we have quite a number of projects related to technological, managerial, organizational, and strategic issues around cybersecurity. So technology is always present at research projects at MIT, most of them. And the others are really important to the center, which is a managerial, organizational, and strategic approaches. I myself am focused a lot around cyber risk and cyber risk management. Those are areas that interest me, but I've spent a lot of years looking at distributed systems. I've spent a lot of years looking at industrial control systems and cybersecurity in those areas, issues around cyber range, issues around vulnerability management, bug bounty programs, probably a dozen or so other topics in cybersecurity. But today, I think we'll talk mostly about cyber risk management approaches and how firms look at that and where we think the directions are going.
Absolutely. So if you look at the cybersecurity landscape, Michael, the discussion is moving from how do I prevent an attack? How do I make sure that my defenses are strong? The discussion is evolving into how do I manage my cyber risk? So the whole focus of the CISO, the security team, the CEO, the CFO, and the board members increasingly, and by the way, not to forget the regulators, is around good cyber risk management practices in exercise and good cyber risk management processes. In your view of the world, in your perspective, what do you think is the definition of a good cyber risk management for a company?
Okay. So well, let's first start, just so we all get on the same page. Let's start with cyber risk. So cyber risk is an operational risk. It is something that is composed of a number of components, systems, process, people, and external events. And by systems, I mean technology, but it also can be systems of operations and plants, physical structures, and so on and so forth. The focus, I think, is mostly around process, people, and technology, though when we look at external events, we're looking a lot at supply chain issues. So those are the key factors of cyber risk. Cyber risk, like all other risks, is some product of uncertainty and exposure. And in uncertainty, we look at things like vulnerabilities, maturity of the organization, and maturity of processes and people. We look at issues around the threat landscape. We will look at vulnerability management. And so there are a number of things that we can look at and that we can try to control to reduce uncertainty. And then with regard to exposure, we look at potential losses. We look at what's often referred to as what are our crown jewels, or our most important information, or parts of our system that we need to protect. We look at what's the potential loss to future work, and so on. So if we understand the definition of cyber risk to be that product of uncertainty and exposure, then we need to both, in my mind, we need to both measure it so we know how we are doing, and we can report, and we can have targets and aim to do better, but we also have to manage it. And many people have often said you can't manage what you can't measure. And I think that's important here, though I do think the process and the management of people, systems, and policies in order to better your risk management process may have, especially for companies who are maturing in this area or just beginning to mature, may have a strong qualitative approach. But even in that qualitative process, and by that I mean you may set certain goals according to some of the frameworks that are available, things like the cybersecurity, the NIST cybersecurity framework, or maturity models like C2M2 or others that are available, which I refer to as qualitative approaches. And you may manage your process along those lines, so you can sort of see which controls are in place, security controls are in place, how you're doing on vulnerability management, and so on. But ultimately, you have to measure so that you can get an idea of how you're doing, how you're progressing, what are choices you're making in investing in cybersecurity. And then it's very important for ways in which you report both at the C-suite level and out to the board. It's been apparent that boards react much better to quantitative approaches and can grasp them. Boards have been dealing in measures of risk, quantitative approaches to risk for many years, whether it be credit risk or equity risk or other types of risk. And so when we report out to boards or we bring these numbers, this process together of managing, we do want to imagine some sort of quantitative measure for that. So I'll stop for a minute because I may have covered more than you asked, or maybe less. So go ahead.
So Michael, actually that's a great segue into the next question, which is, as a CISO, how do I think about cyber risk management in a holistic way? When can I be confident that, okay, I understand what a good cyber risk management practice might mean, and I understand what are the trade-offs, where am I in the journey? How do I think about this holistic approach to cyber risk management?
Well, I think we described part of it, which is measuring and managing it. We didn't go as far as to look at the various approaches to managing, that is affecting the ultimate level of risk. We didn't look at areas of what we refer to as mitigation, that is, how can we sort of reduce some of the uncertainty and eliminate some of the vulnerabilities. How can we transfer risk? And this is the area of cyber insurance, which many organizations have been looking at as a very active area in the insurance industry. Or we can look at accepting and being prepared for certain risks. And I think we do our best to do those three things. And that process has to be managed with a budget. And it comes back full circle again to managing things either on a quantitative or a qualitative basis, making smart decisions about how you budget to expend on mitigation, insurance, transferring risk, which is what the insurance is, and how much you spend on accepting and preparing. And in preparing, we're doing things like tabletop exercises. We're making sure that certain things can't be accessed, that we have plans for if things that occur. We really need to do all those things. And then we need to still get back to the issue of having some way to report out and some way to have an overall sense that we're getting better. This is the best we can do. We live in an asymmetric environment where organizations need to find one flaw and we need to protect against all. We can do the best we can to take state-of-the-art, best of practice measurement, and then as a result of the measurement, manage in a state-of-the-art, best practice way. But there will always be things like what's referred to as black swan events, which can occur outside of our control. And that's really the prepare and accept aspect of things that we need to focus on.
Very cool, Michael. Do you want to talk about the Q framework that you have, which summarizes or which actually helps visualize a robust cyber risk management practice?
Yeah, thank you. I do at this point because I feel there's a lot, in this conversation for people to grab. What I do with groups of CISOs, I talk to a lot of executives in the C-suite. And when I get them together, even groups which include people who are very experienced in cybersecurity, I often try to simplify things up front because we have so many different aspects of our language around cyber risk management, cybersecurity, that I think it becomes difficult sometimes to have a detailed conversation, especially among people in either very different parts of a single organization or with people who are from different organizations. And the center I run is a interdisciplinary center, includes, a number 25 plus Fortune 500 companies that, you know, talk to each other, even though they may be in very different industries. And this tool is useful to them. On the three sides of the cube, one of them talks about whether you're looking internally or externally with regard to inside your organization, or either outside looking into other organizations or outside looking into your own organization. Another side of the cube has to do with whether you measure, and this I'll describe two types of organizations. There are organizations who will measure, say, once a year through an audit, and will build a management plan around that audit for their cybersecurity budget. And they will budget and they will measure it and manage it that way. I refer to that as more of just a measurement organization. It's not any frequency. They may occasionally revisit, especially as we get, sort of external warnings or issues that might occur, that may affect all organizations. And we've seen a number of these over the last couple of years. I think many are aware of things. Obviously, COVID and work at home. Obviously, the Russian events and the threats to cyber threats to the United States, but and a number of major breaches. So some organizations will revisit, but not with any frequency. On the management side, we have organizations which will much more actively, they will measure, but they will much more actively manage. So we might see a weekly adjustment in a plan, or a SWAT team that goes, looks at something in particular with greater speed. So we have both the measurement and the management on another face of the cube. And then we have qualitative versus quantitative. And I've talked some about qualitative cybersecurity framework, C2M2, a maturity model. I think there are dozens of frameworks to help people with qualitative measuring of cybersecurity within their organizations. And the quantitative approach, which Safe Security fits into, along with others, which is used to get more of a number, and to really be able to do what ifs and look at those numbers and how they will be affected. Notice that the qualitative approach, it's very difficult to trade off between budget expenditures, for example. You don't really get a measure to see how well you're doing by implementing one budget over another budget, or one project over another project. So the quantitative approach has a role there. When you put the three sides together of the cube, each divided in two, you end up with 8 faces. And not all organizations will need to or will address all faces, and they will address them sometimes differently with different tools. So that's important to realize. But once we set up the cube, we're able to get organizations to talk a lot about various applications and how they've approached those applications. One might, for example, want to do an internal assessment of cyber risk, and they may want to manage it actively, and they may want to use a quantitative approach. Such an organization could use a product like Safe Security to do that quantitative part and to actively manage. So an internal management quantitative approach. We built a small collection of case studies around these, and which give some ideas of the way people approach different faces of the cube. But that's the tool we use to create some discussion. We have people share ideas about them, and I think people learn a lot from each other. We keep it relatively simple along those lines.
Great, Michael. And I think the cube is a great visualization tool and a framework, as you said, to really understand where am I and where should I be. There is no single answer which is applicable to every company, right? For every company, the landscape and the maturity, the optimal answer might be very, very different. And I would love to get your thoughts on each of these dimensions. So let's talk about the external and internal dimension.
Right.
With the increasing supply chain risk, I mean, this issue is coming into the forefront here. How should a CISO view this dimension to manage the third party, fourth party risk as well as internal risk, this whole internal versus external dimension?
Great question, Prakash. Pankaj, I think there are several aspects to it. Interesting enough, it's not just looking at your supply chain vendors and trying to understand what their risk is. It's also the fact that they will be looking at you, trying to understand what your risk is. So this external view from looking from the outside in it is important both for you in determining your supply chain, but also for your business when others are deciding based on cybersecurity concerns, risk concerns around cybersecurity, how you look to them. So you'll not only be wanting to understand a collection of suppliers with varying types of risk exposure, cyber risk exposure, but you'll want to be able to do the right things in your organization to manage your view as others have looking at you from the outside. So really important to think about that it isn't just a one-way thing. To help a little bit with the conversation, this has typically been done through surveys and other types of qualitative measures. They've become quite burdensome and also, it's a little unclear the accuracy because there's a lot of interpretation going on. So I think as we move forward, the external quantitative approach of how people look at their supply chain partners and how others look at you will become more and more important. And I think organizations will be choosing a face of the cube where they either look externally through a quantitative approach and at least measure it, with some periodicity, or they will more actively manage that just as a concern as to how things will go. Just had a discussion the other day with someone who's very famous in the resilient supply chain area, and supply chains themselves have a natural bottleneck. We don't even need to look at cybersecurity, but they're natural bottlenecks. Now think about whether those bottlenecks would be the target of a cyber attack. And so in the past, the bottleneck, other types of risks were involved in that bottleneck becoming an issue. Now there's this additional sort of asymmetric cyber capability that can affect those supply chains in that way. So I think you have to look at individuals. You also have to look at your supply chain as a whole, and you may have to switch out organizations or duplicate efforts in order to protect your production or your individual company.
All right. And Michael, the qualitative versus quantitative dimension, this is an interesting one, especially because of all the regulatory activity going on across the world, where regulators are looking at how cyber risk management should be part of reporting, formal reporting by companies and the board. In the context of that in the context of regulators getting more involved in this, do you think that quantitative measurement of cyber risk is becoming a must-have, at least for public companies or at least for a specific profile of companies, and qualitative alone might not be good enough going forward?
I think it's an excellent thing to consider. I have seen issues around breaches and things that have occurred where having quantitative measures significantly can help, or in some cases can hurt your case or the issues that are at hand. As best practices and more benchmarks become available through various organizations, whether it be through safe security or through things like the breach report or some of the common reports that come out on cybersecurity, it's good to have a sense of how your organization compares to some of those benchmarks. And I think that can help significantly both in the management, but also in case something does occur, and things, most of us understand that we are susceptible to the potential for a breach. So things can occur. And I think it's good to have the quantitative backup as a way in which to show you were measuring and managing in a way that was in a best practice or in the normal course of doing your business, and that it compared to your peers. And I think that's a really significant, in addition to the bonus with regard to the numbers and being able to select projects and report to the board. I think it's, looking backwards, it's a very good thing to have if something might occur.
And Michael, that the cube framework is a journey for any CISO. If a CISO wants to put it into execution, how should he or she think about this journey? How should he or she scope it out? Are there some natural steps, first steps that the CISO can take to get on this journey to get an ideal state?
Well, I think that, depending on the size of the organization, cataloging your implementations and the way the various parts of the organization are implementing their cyber risk approach, cyber risk management approach, not all parts of the organization will be the same. Things will work differently in different, they will work differently in marketing than they will in production. It will work differently in, perhaps parts of the organization that are in Europe versus parts of the organization that are in the US or, South America or whatever. And having a way in which you can share implementations and be able to explain what's been done and how it has worked for you will work very well as a sort of a common language or a way for organizations to talk to each other. Again, I think it's a way of simplifying a complicated conversation. Our hope is that enough cases will be developed around the cube and enough examples will come out, or case studies around each of the faces, that organizations will use this, especially to some extent the small to medium sized enterprises, but also larger organizations will be able to use this to say, so these other organizations in my field, they've implemented the external quantitative measurement approach using these tools. Maybe we should consider those. We had not considered that face before. Now we're going to put some effort into it. Here are some people in the industry or in competing industries or different industries that have chosen specific approaches. They're documented, associated with the cube. How can we use those ideas and see how they may work for us? Also feel it fits well in organizations who are providing sort of consulting services to organizations about how to get started or how to move on with their risk practice.
All right. The gardener has chosen the right time to be here. So I'll ask the last question, Michael, and I'll go on mute, which is, how can safe security help a CISO on this journey to get to best in class in executing, implementing cube model for cyber risk management?
Well, I think the quantitative journey is a is a extensive journey. It involves, a fair amount of inputs and involvement of the organization. We see quite a difference in this sort of qualitative framework approach, where it might involve fewer people and maybe less hours and less whatever to implement that. But it's really important, organization like Safe Security, really important that organizations put their toe in the water and that they begin to feel the process of quantitatively measuring risk and quantitatively managing risk, um, as a means for reporting, as I've mentioned, reporting to the board, choosing between projects, getting a feel for when we're doing better, being able to reward parts of the organizations that are improving, understanding where the weaknesses are. I do feel as you become more quantitative and your toe and more of your foot and your leg goes in the water, that you're able to manage things more actively and be able to reduce the sort of importance of that yearly audit and become more of a dynamic organization. We do a lot of work in what we refer to as dynamic cyber risk management, where we really feel organizations need to make changes in their investments in whether it be asset allocation or vulnerability management. And depending on where they are in their life cycle of developing cyber risk management practices, they need to be able to invest short-term or long-term and do trade-offs between those types of investments. And so the quantitative approach certainly helps you think about those both short-term, but also what we're doing a lot is to be able to model them longer term to build a resilient organization. I should, in addition, I want to mention that safe security really does address the process, people, and technology aspects of risk management. And that's something that's difficult to find in a single quantitative approach. And I do think, as it is an operational risk and clearly defined along those lines, to leave any one of those out in the long term will be a shortcoming with regard to quantitatively measuring where you're going. I also think they themselves are building an experience of best practices and ways to compare yourself quantitatively to others in the industry. And I feel that's an important practice and an important type of support to have, as I've addressed, in both building your cyber risk management practice, but also, if need be, justifying it either to the board or external regulators or other organizations. So I think that all the tools are in place. There is no other tool that captures both process, people, and technology so well in order to create a quantitative assessment that can be used either in a initial way to periodically manage things, or in a much more active way to manage things on a daily or much greater frequency.
Great.